looking at Thomas Aquinas' the excerpt from his Summa Theologica. I think that with this reading, the real key is to understand what a self-evident first principle is. Thomas explains that there's what he calls the theoretical reason, and practical reason. Theoretical reason is the use of reason, you and I, our ability to think, our intellect, in pursuit of knowledge of what is. So theoretical reason would be, let's say, logic. Actually, that's not quite right. Let's say science. Science is the pursuit of knowledge of nature. And theoretical reason pursues the knowledge of what is, which would include physical nature, but also, you could say, even mathematics is also the use of theoretical reason. Anything that's in pursuit of knowledge of what is. Practical reason, on the other hand, is, generally speaking, what is right to do. So theoretical reason is really about knowledge of what is, and practical reason is reasoning, using your reason to decide what to do, what is right, what is just, what is good. So it's practical in the sense it's about action. And he says that both of these uses of reason have their first principles. So what is a first principle, and why is it important that it be self-evident? The first principle is the foundation of knowledge. The things that all of the rest of what we know is built on. So he mentions that a self-evident first principle in logic for theoretical reason would be nothing can be both true and false, or no statement can be both true and false at the same time. And the important thing is that that has to be understood to do anything in logic, really anything in mathematics, or anything in terms of reasoning about what is. The same statement, let's say, can't be both true and false at the same time. And Thomas is saying that this is a first principle, it's a starting point for reason, but it's also self-evident, and that's what's key. What does it mean to say that something is self-evident? When we say that something is self-evident, we accept it as true. We say that it's necessarily true, and that we accept it as true without needing it to be demonstrated or proved. That's the idea is it's evident, it's clear in itself. So Thomas says in this reading that there are actually self-evident. There is a basic self-evident first principle for practical reason, and that is what? This is what he calls the basic, most fundamental precept of practical reason. Precept is a rule for action, rule according which we should act, that the good should be pursued and evil avoided. What he's saying is that we recognize that principle is true, and it's necessarily true. that the good is that which should be done or pursued, and evil should be shunned and avoided. This is immediately clear to us without proof. That's the self evidence part. So that's the real fundamental claim that he's making here, is that when it comes to ethics and morality, there is at least one basic self evident precept or rule that we all follow, whether we're conscious of it or not. And that is that the good should be pursued and evil avoided. The second big idea in this reading follows from that, because it's quite obvious that this first principle, or this precept, that the good should be pursued and evil avoided, is very, very general. First principles are general. And it's not really of much use, practically speaking, unless we have some notion of what the goods are. That is, we can say, well, everyone agrees that the good should be pursued, but we might disagree about what is actually good. So it raises the question, what is good? Or you might say, what are the goods that we should be pursuing? And this is where he starts talking about our natural inclinations. And this is where you have to take into account his whole view, which is a theological view, by which I mean he takes it for granted that human beings were created by God. That's absolutely key, because the point that he wants to make about the goods is that God created us with certain natural inclinations, and those inclinations give us a clue about what is good. I'll give you two examples that he uses. One is people are naturally curious. We are naturally inclined, therefore, to find knowledge. What does that tell us? Or what's the clue there? That knowledge is good. Another example, people are naturally inclined and this has to be understood loosely, right? There's all sorts of variations when it comes to sexual orientation. I don't think that anybody is being excluded here, but let's just say that we all seem to have naturally an inclination to produce children and to create families. Doesn't matter if, what your sexual orientation is, we all share it. And maybe some of us don't really care about having children, and that's okay too. There's always exceptions, but there is a general inclination amongst human beings to produce children. What does that tell us? That family is a good, raising children and educating them, but that's a good. So it's really quite remarkable, I think, the basis of his ethics, because what he starts with is the notion that there is an actual objective, universal foundation for human ethics in general, and that is the good should be pursued and evil avoided. And we have some clue as to what the good is by looking at our own nature, that is, our own natural inclinations. Now, this is, of course, very general and sketchy, and exactly, how our natural inclinations point us towards these goods, that has to be handled very carefully. But it's a remarkable idea, really. And again, it's a theological idea in the sense that it presupposes that not only that God exists, but that human beings were created by God, and that God gave us certain natural inclinations because he wanted us to follow them. That is, that it's good to follow them. And this is how we end up with a certain idea that knowledge and truth are good, so that anything harmful to them, ignorance, let's say, is a bad. Family is a good, and anything harmful to the family would be considered a bad. So it does give us a certain type of orientation in terms of identification of the good things that we should be pursuing and the evils that we should be avoiding.